in my community, if there's a sign that goes up for a permit that's supposed to happen on a piece of land, everybody wants to know. They're looking, they're finding out what's coming over here. Is it going to be a new store, or is it going to be some kind of manufacturing plant? Like, having these kind of conversations with one another and really taking attention to what's happening in our community begins to shift up and change policy. So regardless of what's happening on the federal level, and I know it's a little challenging right now for a lot of us, we got to look at what's going on in the local and think about a long game.
You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Mattern, your host, and I've got Heather McTeer Toney on the program. I'm really excited to have Heather on the program. She has an amazing background. 27, she became the first African-American mayor of Greenville, Mississippi. She's an author of a number of books. Before the Streetlights Came On, Black America's Urgent Call for Climate Solutions. She's appeared on all kinds of different media outlets. She's the executive director of Bloomberg Philanthropies Beyond Petrochemicals campaign. And the list goes on and on. But I guess we'll just kind of jump into the interview to talk to Heather about all the amazing work that she's done and she's up to right now. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks so much, Matt, and thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Well, I always like to start at the beginning. Like, what is your path, and what kind of inspired you to take these steps as an environmentalist, as a political activist? What were those inspirational moments?
Well, I like to think I had a very unconventional path. When people think about environmentalists and climate science, they tend to think of all of the fields that have the "ist" on the end of it, environmentalist, scientist. And I stayed as far away from the science buildings as humanly possible when I was in college. So I did not come to this space with a purely scientific mindset. I was born and raised in the Mississippi Delta. I am the daughter of a civil rights attorney and a school teacher. And I spent my childhood surrounded by not only people who were impacted by the land and the environment, but also a space that most people know to be very close to poverty. So coming up, to me, I never learned about environmental issues as something you got in school. We learned and just knew environment and climate issues because we knew when hunting season was, right? When the river goes up and down in the Mississippi Delta because of when there's heavy rain, or it's harvest season at the same time as it's football season. And these things are what I think grounded me without really even knowing it, of how closely connected I was to environmental issues. Later in my life and career, I went to school at Spelman and went to law school at Tulane, but I came home to work with my dad and eventually ran for mayor of my hometown and began working on what I thought were economic issues, job development. How do you make life better for the people that are in our families, in our friends? And it wasn't until then that it really struck me of the impact of environmental um, injustices in our community. So by working on water issues with then Administrator Lisa Jackson, who came and visited my community as a part of her tour across the country to identify what are environmental issues. She was the first woman, first African American to serve as administrator for U.S. EPA under President Obama. And she really just sort of pulled me to the side and said, you're working on environmental justice issues, right? And I said, no, I'm absolutely not. And she said, no, you actually are. And it gave me a different insight into how important water, land, air, are to economic development of communities, but also how these are things that have been um, really devastating when not addressed to those very same communities. So, Matt, that's sort of like a long way of saying how I came around to being in this space. But I will tell you, it is the most passionate work, and I think some of the most fulfilling and necessary work of our generation.
Absolutely. And shout out to the Green Wave. My undergraduate degree is in economics from Tulane. So
So then we both share that wonderful notion that if you can go to school and graduate in New Orleans during Mardi Gras, then you have truly earned your your degree.
yeah, and it's been about 5 years down in New Orleans, and that's kind of part of my environmentalist journey as well. Is that I remember being in law school and reading an expose at the time done by the Wall Street Journal about how the oil companies were, um, you know, creating such an environmental mess in Louisiana, cutting canals through the swamps and bayous, which were destroying the wetlands there and dumping heavy metals all over the place and polluting the groundwater and just making it a toxic stew. And, just like, holy moly, what are we going to do about this? And, and it's been going on for literally, decades, maybe 100 plus years, the degradation of the environment in all kinds of regions across the country and particularly in areas that are economically impoverished because that's where the big oil and big power companies are able to kind of dominate the landscape politically and economically. So tell us a little bit about what were those first steps like for you? Did you run for mayor before you had kind of you know decided that the environment was a top issue for you?
Absolutely. It just, running for mayor, it was about being of service to people who raised me, who had such a hand in not only who I am and what I've become, but being a public servant, I think, is a part of my entire family background. And so that desire to really help all of us move forward in our lives, generational building of a community, those are things that bring me joy. But I think it was so lost on entire communities, particularly communities that have for so long been impoverished. What it means to have a healthy environment, right? There's so many issues that impact a community. It's always thinking about health and safety, very important. Thinking about jobs and economic development, because honestly, when you are trying to feed your family, you're trying to make sure that your kids are going to school, trying to make sure that you're just safe going in and out of your home, whether it's at play or at worship, all of these things are priority. But at the end of the day, if you cannot breathe the air in the community that you're living in, you become sicker. Sick people can't work. If you are not able to do simple things like maybe grow a garden, as much as we talk about growing our own food, if you can't do it on land that's clean, then you're making yourself worse. If you can't drink water without an additional cost, then it is more expensive to just go about your daily lives. So the underlying of the environment and its importance to our everyday life is so critical in understanding that when I really began to embrace this issue, I well, two things happened. One, I got really angry. I got angry at how much we had not been told, how communities that are on the front lines of the environmental and climate crisis are often the ones that are first and worst hit, but there was not the services and the need for rectifying injured land and people. um, and then we seem to be on the back cover of any and every fundraising idea, like always showing this images of people or what has hurt people without at the same time coming to understand how do we correct these problems. And then I think in the communities that we work in, it was very obvious that there was a divide between what are environmental issues and people issues, right? It's not just penguins and polar bears. Let's put it that way. It's about people, and how people are living their everyday lives to the best of our all of our ability. We have one planet, and so it's important for us to be able to do that safely and in a healthy way. Those are the urging things that really were important to me, as well as understanding it as a civil rights issue. So a combination of all of this, I think, really not only catapulted me into the space, but there was also this little incident called the BP oil spill. I don't know if you remember that or not
Yeah, I
in
kind of
New
remember
Orleans.
that. It's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, sort of a big deal. At the time, I was mayor and I had just been appointed by Lisa Jackson to the local government advisory committee. And if you never knew what these committees of um, local officials do and how important they are the lifeblood of being able to get genuine information and insight from a local perspective to the federal government. So I was appointed as chair of that, and 2 weeks after that, BP oil spill happened. And I very quickly became on the front lines of putting together local elected officials, talking and seeing how EPA regulations were helpful in cleanup, helpful in economic development, and reestablishing the community in a very environmentally sound way, and hearing feedback right from people who were going through it every single day. And the ways in which we weave together environment, culture, jobs, tourism, regulations, accountability is paramount to how we are successful together as a community.
So tell us a little bit about your work for the Bloomberg Philanthropies project, and what are you doing there?
So beyond petrochemicals, it is a effort to stop the expansion of petrochemical facilities in the United States of America, but particularly in the Southeast. So if you have remember being in the area of New Orleans and particularly in the South of Louisiana, you go across the Mississippi River and you see just miles and miles and miles of facilities. In fact, oftentimes, if you're coming in to South Louisiana or into the Gulf, Texas area, you see these big plumes of smoke that are going up. And those are chemical facilities that more often than not are emitting very dangerous chemicals into the surrounding communities and areas. So our mission is very simple. We have enough of these facilities. We do not need to build out more of them, especially as they continue to unjustly and unfairly impact communities in which they're sitting in. So we focus primarily in three areas. There is the Louisiana Cancer Alley area. That's how most people know it. It's a 78-mile stretch of Mississippi River coast that's completely inundated by chemical facilities. Then there is the Texas area. That's the Gulf Texas area, as well as the Houston Shipping Channel. And then there is the Ohio River Valley region, where we're beginning to see petrochemical facilities start to try to pop up in places that, again, have been overburdened by pollution. When we address what is happening in communities, we also help communities have space and have a way to decide what they want to do in their own communities. And the thing about petrochemicals is they're actually a triple threat. Petrochemicals are the building blocks to plastic. Yeah, it's what you make plastic out of, pure and simple. It is chemicals made out of oil. And the continued increase of making petrochemicals, they're a byproduct of the oil and gas industry. And as our planet comes off of oil and gas and into more renewables, the industry sort of had to figure out, okay, what do we do with all this stuff? Well, plastic. They're like, you need more plastic. I think a lot of people would agree that adding more plastic is not necessarily what we need to do for our planet right now. In addition to the fact that the oceans are completely inundated with plastic, when you are just in your day to day work in life and getting rid of plastic waste. We see recycling bins and places that we're putting all of this plastic, but it begs the question, what's happening to it? Do we need more of it? And how do we stop it? Because the creation of all of this new plastic just continues to clog our systems. So, Beyond Petrochemicals is working to, again, stop the creation of new plastic facilities so that we are not continuing to put harmful plastics, microplastics, and chemical emissions into the air. We're saving lives, working in our environment, at the same time, reducing emissions across the board.
Well, that's great work. I know that I had interviewed Senator Ben Allen, who's a state senator out here in California, and he had helped pass some model legislation regarding the reduction of plastics here in California. And so transitioning to materials that are not plastics. And we are capable of producing materials that are not plastics for the use for the same things that we use plastics for currently. And I'm curious as to if you're working on similar legislation or projects like that to kind of, turn the corner on this legislatively.
I think there's so many opportunities to do that right now. You're absolutely right. We are brilliant people. And the ingenuity of America has shown itself time and time again through different periods of industrial and technological development. So it certainly begs the question of why can't we come up with some alternative to plastic that is not only healthier for us, but also gives us opportunities for strong economic development. I think this is, though, an interesting time because while there's not as much push for this on the federal level, local action, like you just identified in California, is without a doubt where it's at because local action moves people not only quickly, but it also is something that people feel closely. We do our work in a way that helps to provide space for those local actions to take place. So, making sure that the infrastructure is not built out such that local actions can be in place to provide space, provide infrastructure, provide idea developments that are often coming from those local spaces is a part of our role. Holding the space so that others can move forward in that legislative space, I think, is critical.
Tell us a little bit about your book, your new book, and why you wrote it and why you think it was important to be put out there.
So I wrote Before the Streetlights Come On. Actually, it was a development that started when the COVID crisis hit us, and I was writing about how we are experiencing so many different issues in the Black community in particular that have an underlying foundation of climate change. But it was something that folks weren't really talking about. In fact, when I started writing, just in having conversations with friends and family members, I would ask them, what do they think about climate? And they would tell me, Heather, nobody's thinking about climate. What are you talking about? We've got to deal with COVID. We've got to deal with police brutality. We've got to figure out how to just get our kids into school. You are really, really on a whole different, not in our community space. And I muddled over that for a moment because I realized that there's so many of our issues that are about climate change. but we had not done a good job in the environmental community of identifying it with all cultures. So starting, charity starts at home, starting with my own being a Black American from Mississippi, I wanted to talk about these issues with respect to the Black community and really identify how we've been in this space of talking about moving the needle on environmental issues and how they related to all of the other major concerns that we experience. So, whether it is talking about violence in a community, that is directly related to climate change and how we're seeing an increase in heat and the relationship between heat and tree canopies and clean air to an elevation of violence, whether it is domestic violence, child abuse, or even police brutality. Connecting the dots in science to show us that these things are not just happening because of there being some upset in the community. There's actual scientific information as well as conclusions that can be drawn that tie climate change to many of the problems that we see in the community, as well as the solutions for that. Because I don't think that it's fair to talk about the problems without talking about an opportunity for solutions and really sitting in that.
Yeah, I've certainly talked to a number of people about heat islands in cities and the lack of tree canopy in in inner cities and how that affects those communities adversely, and how those communities have historically not had the cities plant trees in those areas, and so they suffer from a lack of just foliage and things that heat up the community to unhealthy levels. So there's all kinds of things that can be done to mitigate those factors. I was curious, I wanted to kind of pivot to the election and wanted to know kind of what your role was in that process. Were you actively engaged? And my kind of takeaway was that Kamala Harris didn't make the case as strongly as she could have on the environment. I felt like they were trying to soft pedal it because the pollsters were saying, hey, it's not a saleable issue or something like that. And she didn't come on as strongly as I thought she could have. And obviously 2020 hindsight, you can kind of, Monday morning quarterback this thing. But, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will say in my personal capacity, I've always been very active in elections and in voter engagement. I think constituency education and voter engagement is critical for people understanding the issue. And I think on both sides of the aisle, folks didn't pay attention to the issues and pushed it to climate in particular, pushed it to a back burner versus making it at the forefront of what we're experiencing and what we're doing. I think that happened across the board. The I guess bright spot in all of this is that climate change is a very local issue. And there are a number of opportunities, if we're willing to see them and take them, where people at the most local level can weigh in and begin to shift policy. Take, for example, boards and commissions, whether it be something like a city council or a tree board or a port commission. Regardless of the outcome of the last election, we have municipal elections that happen just about every year in this country, as well as state and county level elections, where those positions are extremely important in determining how we use clean energy, how we reduce um, petrochemical and chemical companies from not only coming into our community, but hold them accountable. It's the people who live next door to us, who attend church with us, that we play, that our kids play soccer and football together. These are the same people who are sitting on these boards and commissions. So the more we're able to take our opportunity and really look internally what's going on at home, talking to one another, saying, hey, is that smoke coming out of that plant over there black? Is what's going on in that space? Should they be doing that? Or I don't in my community, if there's a sign that goes up for a permit that's supposed to happen on a piece of land, everybody wants to know. They're looking, they're finding out what's coming over here. Is it going to be a new store, or is it going to be some kind of manufacturing plant? Like, having these kind of conversations with one another and really taking attention to what's happening in our community begins to shift up and change policy. So regardless of what's happening on the federal level, and I know it's a little challenging right now for a lot of us, we got to look at what's going on in the local and think about a long game.
Yeah, I think that that's a brilliant strategy, and I think that, quite frankly, that kind of happened in the first Trump administration. Is that I thought that a lot of people woke up at the state and local levels, and there were a lot of amazingly good new policies that were created in the environmental space, because people kind of started to take it back and say, "Hey, we may not get it from Washington, but we could get it at the state and local level, and we can do a lot of work there." And I love what you're saying about just looking at the permitting, water boards, air quality boards. There are all kinds of different opportunities for people to serve, and we should be looking at the micro, because that's where we can affect it the most, and start to change the conversation. So I think that's really important, way to look at this.
I think absolutely. And it's a space where people can see the work taking place. It's not just a subjective idea that's theorized out there. It is, we can see the work taking place. We can be a part of the work. And another important point to note is this period is also one in which we're seeing the federal government come away from many of the investments that were made to support clean energy and to support this level of accountability that communities want. So, in doing so, I think local communities, while they are on, again, that front line of the action, now also have to turn to how we're investing in our local nonprofits, places where funding has been stripped away. We still want to see those development projects move forward. So it is giving us a space to internalize and giving us a space to say, hey, we are clearly making a decision that we want accountability, clean air, clean water, clean land, and we want to have these things happen in a way that are measurable, accountable, that we're not putting more plastics, not putting more petrochemicals into our bodies, into our atmosphere, and we are creating development in our communities. So having the space to do that right now, again, I know it looks very tough. Um, but we have to say, what does this give us an opportunity to do? What lessons did we learn from the last time to make sure that we have staying power? You mentioned at the first administration, the local government stepping in. There was the city's effort of we're all in, we're still in. Where mayors and governors really stepped in to make sure that they were continuing to stay aligned with global climate targets, continuing to reduce emissions in their states through either their legislative authority and power or their local authority and power. And they were still able to look at how we are moving towards clean energy development and using that as an economic factor, because we can't leave out that part. Um, these are the pathways, tools, and resources that we're reverting back to. Like, no one that I that I know and thinking about and working with in this movement is taking the approach of woe is me, we're all going to hell in a handbasket, we're doomed. Because that's not what we do, especially if you are coming from the environmental justice movement. We have seen dark spaces before. Um, the lives of countless children and families are dependent upon the advocacy of clean energy and environment. And so, no, this is not the time that we sit down and cry. This is the time that we collectively come together, look at pathways on local levels that we move forward and we keep pushing.
Well, tell us about the work that you've done for this group, Rare. You're a board member of, and the type of work that it's doing, and how people can connect with it.
I'm really excited about Rare. I'm one of the newer board members, and they do a number of different things, but one that is of great interest to me is climate storytelling. It is how we are sharing and talking about the message and weaving the message of climate protections and environmental protections into every element, scripted or unscripted, of what we do, so that people begin to really resonate with it and they see it. If you think about the movies that you've seen or just television shows that you've watched, I challenge people to look and see if you can identify the climate spaces in there. Like, do you see recycling containers? Do you see EV cars that are used? When they're talking about futuristic things, you're watching sci-fi. Do you see lines growing across, like utility poles that are carrying electricity, or are they all underground? Like all of these different ways that we resonate with how climate shows up in our everyday lives is what is so important about climate storytelling. When Erin Brockovich was on screen and people saw how she went through the experience of recognizing these toxic chemicals in the community, garnering community support, actually revealing and holding to account chemical companies, that resonated with a lot of people. And that is something that I think comes across very well when we talk about all kinds of media, whether it is television, radio, music, podcasts. People go to those trusted sources, and we have to do a better job of telling the stories. And that's one of the things that Rare does. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's great. And I greatly appreciate, having you on the show, Heather, and talking with you about the solution and living in the solution. And everybody should go out and check out Heather's new book, Before the Streetlights Come On, Black America's Urgent Call for Climate Solutions. And, follow her and her organizations. Maybe, Heather, you can do a shout out to where they can find your stuff on social media.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Please follow and check out beyondpetrochemicals.org, www.beyondpetrochemicals.org. And you can find us on Twitter. You can find us, oh, it's not Twitter anymore. You can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky Social. And if you like TikToks, you can follow me there, Heather McTeer Toney. I'm on all the socials, and just check in. I love to see, to chat with folks and know what the latest and greatest is, and let's stay in some hope together.
Okay, that sounds great, and definitely look forward to connecting with you and working with you collaboratively going forward as a fellow Green Wave alumni and activist. Love to see the work that you're doing down there, and thank you, Heather, for being on the show. It's been a great pleasure, and love to have you back sometime to talk about the great work you're doing.
Thanks so much, Matt.
To learn more about our work at A Climate Change and how you can help us reach our goal of planting 30,000 trees in the Amazon this year, visit aclimatechange.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. See you next time.